Well, it's no secret the use of artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to writings and works of entertainment, has been controversial to say the least. It's been a big sticking point, as we've seen recently in both the Screen Actors Guild and Writers Guild strikes in Hollywood. And there are also legal implications. So I am fortunate to be joined by Professor Alex Albin. He teaches privacy and internet law at both UCLA and the University of Washington. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate that. The first thing I want to ask you to do, because this is so new that so many of us might not necessarily even have a full understanding of what the issue is. So if you can sort of just, for me, I always say, you have to dumb it down for me so that I can understand it and then everybody else will get it. But if you can sort of explain to us a broad overview of what the issues and the concerns are here when it comes to using artificial intelligence in this way.
Well, Ryan, first, thanks for inviting me to talk about this topic. It certainly is complex, and we could spend an entire hour just talking about definitions of artificial intelligence, which is important in this case. There's been a lot of fear and a lot of hype as to how different AI applications might be used in the context of writing. AI certainly is an incredibly useful tool for people who want to do first drafts or people who want to do a search on a specific topic that AI can answer for them. And that's only going to improve over time. We don't want to stop the invention of AI and the very beneficial uses of AI simply because we have some legitimate concerns. In the context of the writers' strike and writers objecting to use of their material in AI databases, again, we should take a deep breath and think about both the use of this technology and how it might be misused. I completely understand that writers are upset when they hear that their novel or article has been used in a database without their permission. The question is whether that violates any of their legal rights. Certainly, when you publish a work and it's available in a lot of different places. I'm the author of several books, and they're available in public libraries. I didn't authorize necessarily them to be used or lent to different readers, but I'm really happy when my works are widely disseminated. And I'm even happy when I find out that a school has used my book or a portion of a book in a class for instructional purposes. We have to think about the social good of the distribution of writing. And that's a very big topic. The question regarding the use of AI in these data training sets is that a natural language model, which is a specific form of artificial intelligence that is under discussion here, that model needs to have data in order to get better and better at replicating human language. That's why these huge computers are used to process not 100 books, not 1,000 books, but hundreds of thousands of books. And when that natural language model is trained on that data set, it's not looking for what did Ernest Hemingway write, unless that's a specific directive, or I want to take the work of this one author. The natural language model is learning, almost like a human baby learns to put language together. It's learning how to string words together based on how often they appear in sequence. I just used the words in sequence. Well, that's something that a natural language model learns by reading thousands of sentences that have that order of those two words. When you look at these AI training data sets, that's the level of granularity that the computer is trying to understand human language. And I think that writers who are upset that their works have been ingested into these large models, I hope that they have this understanding that it's trying to make the model better, and it's not specifically exploiting their work as they know it.
And that, that brings up a good point too, because one of the things that stood out to me as I'm trying to learn about this myself is that if an author were to raise a legal issue, to file a lawsuit, and to bring this to court, I mean, how could a judge tell, how much of this specific author's work is reflected in what the artificial intelligence draws out of it and regurgitates versus that it could be the work of thousands of people, amalgamated and then spit back out, for lack of a better term, based on the learning model. I mean, that's a tricky legal question, isn't it?
Well, it's important to draw a distinction between what we were just talking about, the use of a writer's work in a huge data set where their work is not really identifiable, versus the use of a work when it is generated and published as a piece of authorship. In that case, we have to look at copyright law. Fortunately, American copyright law has a pretty clear test regarding whether something has been used to such a big extent that its copyright is violated. We call this test the substantial similarity test. If I ask an AI application to write a screenplay based on a popular movie, let's say the Barbie movie, and it comes up with something very similar to the Barbie movie, then the authors of the Barbie movie can take the AI application and the so-called author to court and claim legitimately, you've taken so much of my work that it is recognizable in your supposedly new work. And then you go to a jury and they decide whether these two works are substantially similar. I truly believe that we're going to have cases that involve copyright infringement and the use of this test, which is appropriate. And that's just how a writer or a visual artist or a musician can bring an AI product to court and say, you've taken way too much of my work and it is recognizable to users, because ultimately that's the mark of the true value of their work, is whether a user will recognize it.
And you mentioned music as an example. I mean, somebody could just as easily tell an AI generator, hey, I love the Beatles, give me a song that's in the style of the Beatles. And who knows how much of that is going to come. It might spit back Hard Day's Night, and it might give us something completely new. So it's and you mentioned that it's a way of learning. I would guess that these cases, as we have for centuries now with courts, are a way for the courts to learn how to approach this as more cases come forward in the future. Wouldn't you agree?
Courts certainly have a learning curve. I hope that judges take the time to study how the technology works. They don't always do that. But when you talk about the use of music, people have already generated AI musical works by saying, I want something that sounds like the Beatles or sounds like Bruce Springsteen. And that also raises a really interesting legal question. First, are they going to violate the copyright in specific songs? And second, can you have what we call in legal work a sound alike? Are you exploiting a famous person or an artist's name, image, or likeness when you use something very similar? This has come up in a case that went before the Copyright Office earlier this year involving a graphic novel called Zariah of the Dawn, where the trainer apparently said that they wanted the main character, and in fact, the graphic image does look like Zendaya, which to me would say that Zendaya has a pretty good claim that they're using her image or likeness without her consent.
So, in the context of future works, I mean, we see SAG-AFTRA is still trying to sort this out. The Writers Guild has sorted this out already with a tentative agreement. But where it's not just use of their work, they're also trying to protect jobs here. Would you say there's any sort of legal grounds for folks like this to say, hey, we need to put limits on this so that human people and human creativity can still be put to work?
The writers' tentative agreement, I think, struck a pretty good balance about disclosure of when AI has been used. A writer has to disclose to the studio when they have used AI to generate their work, and the studio has to disclose to the writer if they have given the writer an assignment that includes work that has used AI. That's a pretty good outcome at this stage of the game. But to the larger question you pose about whether jobs are going to be replaced, I think that inevitably productivity will increase because AI does allow certain professions, the legal profession, for example, to use this tool to really speed up the time it takes to generate certain kinds of writing. And to the extent that that makes offices more productive, that is beneficial. We don't really know yet if the job impact is going to be major in the near term. In the long term, people are going to use to learn AI as a skill in the same way that people learned how to use internet search to shorten the time span of getting work done, in the same way they used to learn computers to replace pre-computer devices. That's just the march of technology. And I'm very wary when a government steps in and says, we need to regulate this, because the government really doesn't understand, and nor do most of us understand, how the technology is going to be used. The danger of putting regulation in place is that it could cut off some very promising avenues of use of the technology. For example, AI is being used to analyze proteins that make up the genomic sequence. That has big application to finding some cures to diseases like cancer with very targeted types of gene therapy. We don't want to limit that kind of technical development, which is going to ultimately save human lives, when we really don't know how this is going to play out.
So, Professor, what am I not thinking of here? Because we've covered a substantial amount of ground here in a short time. What am I missing that we should be considering as this discussion goes on?
I would say that AI needs to be analyzed in terms of how education is going to be affected. Are students just going to rip off things that they find and can generate on a tool like ChatGPT and submit it? How are schools going to respond to that? That's a really current problem in education right now. And AI can certainly be used in a classroom setting to help teach. It can do personal tutoring, but we also need to understand that AI does have, as the internet search did before it, this potential for plagiarism, this potential for passing off the work of another person or people as your own. That goes back to the old-fashioned honor code that you have in school. You shouldn't be taking other people's work and passing it off on your own, and the same applies here.
Well, and that begs the question, how would a professor know? If a certain AI is that good, and a student says, I need to cover this topic and these angles, or for me as a reporter, I mean, there are plenty of sources out there right now talking about this very topic. I could get onto AI and say, crank me out a 45-second news story all about this, complete with quotes. I mean, how are people going to tell the difference?
There already are companies that offer tools to teachers to enable them to recognize work that's generated by AI. For example, AI tends to give answers in very evenly written paragraphs. And when you note that in a paper, that's sort of a telltale sign that it might have been generated by AI. And there's other kinds of clues than the way AI uses languages. So we can detect that kind of fraud. In terms of generating stories for reporters, Ryan, I think you're out of luck. I think that uh, certain kinds of journalistic pieces will be replaced. Sports scores, very simple narratives of stories. Uh, it can even generate a set of questions. What would you like to ask somebody who's an expert in AI? And it will generate a pretty good list of questions. Ultimately, I think we need to trust that humans have creativity and imagination that a computer, even a natural language model, is really not able to equal. At least I hold out that hope in the future.
Well, good to know my job is safe at least. And I will tell you, I call me old fashioned, but there's something to be said for, in my case, as a reporter, being out on the street or coming to you directly and asking the questions that come to my mind. And I think that has a great value, as does all the stuff you've told me today. UCLA and UW professor Alex Albin, almost mispronounced it. Alex Albin, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Ryan.